Landlords are parasites. Ouch. Okay, that's gotta sting a little. Can we abolish landlordism? Should we abolish landlordism? Is it just a dream? Are people just destined to be tenants for life? And is the hatred of landlords actually justified? I hear this all the time. Landlords are evil. Landlords are greedy. Landlords are parasites. And it only takes someone going on Google and typing in the word landlords are, and the first thing that comes up is landlords are evil, landlords are greedy. I actually think if we run a poll on who the most hated people in the world are right now, amongst Kanye West, Putin, P. Diddy, landlords would rank up there as one of the most hated people in the world right now, based on the fact that the average rent in the UK is £1,223 and the average rent in London, £2,121. So I understand where some of this hatred comes from. Now, there are thousands of people that even want to abolish landlords. Nick Banos, a housing lawyer, even said landlords should be publicly ridiculed in the streets.
I do think they ought to be embarrassed. I do think they ought to be ridiculed. It really fascinates me that whenever there is sort of a protest or a direct action about a landlord, they seem to think that they're entitled to respect. And I just feel that like the law is on their side, economics is on their side, the politicians are on their side, the courts are on their side. The idea that we shouldn't mock them and humiliate them and make them feel ashamed is laughable.
Let's explore the potential impact of abolishing landlordism. Let's look at some alternative housing models and what might work and what might not work. We'll explore some case studies of failed and successful attempts at abolishing landlordism. Before we dive into whether we can abolish landlordism, let's define it so we know we're all on the same page. Landlordism refers to the ownership of property and the rental of that property to a tenant. This is something I found absolutely fascinating in my research, and I hope you find it fascinating too. Landlordism dates back to the feudal system in medieval Europe. This blew my mind. So after William the Conqueror invaded England in 1066, he established a system where land was owned by the crown, and then he distributed land to his loyal followers. So effectively, you invade the country, you want more followers, so you distribute and you dish out land to gain loyal followers, which then created a class of landowners. Now, those owners then rented out that land to tenant farmers. And that system laid the foundation for what we recognize as landlordism today. So the word landlord is derived from Old English, landlaford, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, which means the word land means land and laford means lord. That already starts to show us why there is a natural contention between landlords and tenants, because just the word, the definition, implies that somebody has power over the other. It highlights the power dynamic. I know a lot of people think that landlords shouldn't exist, but I want to be fair in this analysis. So let's talk about some of the good that landlords do in society, then we'll talk about some of the bad. So let's look at some stats and some data. According to the EHS, which is the English Housing Survey, the private rental sector accounts for 19% of households in the UK. So let's talk about some of the investments that they bring to society. Well, landlords play a crucial role in developing properties and bringing them to market. We have a shortage of housing stock in the UK, and private developers are at the forefront of bringing those properties to market. So they invest in new buildings, they invest in bringing old buildings back to life. Without a shadow of a doubt, whether you hate them or not, they contribute to bringing properties to the market and increasing the housing stock. And if we're going to be fair in this analysis, we've got to look at some statistics. And according to the ONS, which is the Office of National Statistics, the construction and real estate sector employs around 2.5 million people. And that's 2.5 million people who are paying tax and contributing to the economy. But more importantly, these private landlords are contributing over 40 billion in taxes to the UK economy every single year. A discussion is landlords are social parasites, which means they take more than they give. But let's look at some figures that might suggest otherwise. When it comes down to their social contribution, the reality is by a landlord bringing a property to market, they're providing housing flexibility. They're providing housing for some vulnerable people, professionals, students. Private landlords allow people to live in properties on a long-term basis while they figure out what their next plans are, whether they're going to buy, whether they're going to relocate, or whether they're going to stay in the country. One of the benefits of the private rental market is the variety of homes that come to market. So we have studios, 1 bed, 2 beds, luxury houses, townhouses, And this is created by small private developers and landlords. Now, this part is really interesting because a lot of tenants, not all, but a lot of tenants would disagree that landlords fulfill their social obligation with their tenants of maintaining and upkeeping the property. And I see this is where there's a lot of contention. Some people say they're happy to pay rent if the landlord did their part, which is making sure that the house is looked after. So who wants to abolish landlordism? There are 8.8 million renters in the UK, and I'm pretty confident the number of people that would love to abolish landlordism is going to be high in the hundreds of thousands. So let's look at some of the people who are actively advocating for abolishing landlordism. We see groups like Acorn and we see groups like Generational Rent who believe that the rental market is fueled on exploitation, which means the landlord is exploiting the tenant because they have something that the tenant needs and therefore they can charge an absurd amount of rent. And they are demanding for increased tenant rights and more public options. There are some political parties who don't like the idea of landlordism. So if we look at Jeremy Corbin has been a long-term critic of landlordism in the UK. He believes tenants are treated unfairly due to high rents, substandard living conditions, and the simple lack of affordable housing. Jeremy Corbin is a big advocate for things like rent control and more stringent regulations on landlords. And if we look at Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, also a big advocate of rent control. He's also criticised the fact that there are not enough affordable housing in London. But my question is this: affordable housing is not the responsibility of private landlords. Affordable housing is the responsibility of our government. But as I said in this video, I'll try and stay on both sides, and you can hear my opinions on whether landlords should be abolished in a separate video. Hey guys, if you're getting any value from this video, make sure you like, comment and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. So can we truly abolish landlordism, or is it just a dream? Look, when it comes down to housing affordability, that's a conversation that we need to have. Some people argue that if we abolish landlordism, that could lead to lower rent across the board and affordable housing for everyone. And they suggest that without the motive to make profit, then all sell prices and all rent prices will be much more affordable. But on the flip side, if we want to be completely honest in this conversation, without the profit motives, landlords will not venture, landlords will not buy, landlords will not take risk, and therefore we would have a shortfall of available properties on the market. This is guaranteed to lead to a housing shortage. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, private landlords are paying over 40 billion a year in taxes. So if we abolish landlordism, that's a shortfall of 40 billion every single year. Now, the real conversation is, even though landlords are paying 40 billion every single year, renters and first-time buyers are not seeing that money because the money's been squandered by our government. If we abolish landlordism, then that also means we've got to look at how that affects the economy and how that affects employment, because the construction and the building industry employs over 2.5 million people. And those 2.5 million people have families to feed, they have taxes to pay, and they have responsibilities. But we've also got to consider the social implications. If we abolish landlordism and we ban landlords, then how does that affect society in general? Well, one thing that will happen is there will naturally be a reduction in properties on the market. A reduction of properties on the market will lead to more evictions, greater homelessness, and the truth is we still can't solve homelessness right now with the amount of properties we have available. When we have less properties on the market, it's only going to get worse, in my opinion. So what are some of the solutions that could ease the contention between landlords and tenants? Well, we could look at some alternative housing models and look at what other countries have tried to implement. Public housing is an option. This requires the government to step in and build and produce houses and get them on the market and rent them at affordable rates. Let's look at an example that I saw in Singapore. The Housing and Development Board, HDB, in Singapore provides affordable housing to 80% of Singapore residents. That is absolutely crazy and commendable. It says the success of this program is attributed to strict regulations and significant government investment. Now, I understand there is hatred for landlords because it feels as if they are taking up all the properties and they're not producing much. But I think it's important to understand why other models are working and other country models are working. It's because their governments are not spending our tax-paying money on lining their own pockets or PPE scandals or feeding their own families, as opposed to putting the money down to help people in their own country. The Housing and Development Board in Singapore provides accommodation for 80% of Singapore residents That blew my mind. Can our government do that? I don't think they can. So I'm probably going to have to remove that from the potential options to help ease the housing crisis in the UK. And the reason our government can't do it is they don't have enough money, and when they do have money, it is squandered, which again opens the doors for private developers who are happy to provide housing, but they have to provide housing at a profit because there is a cost. We need to hold our governments to a higher standard. A developer has to buy the land, which holds a cost, has to build, which holds a cost. Whereas in many cases, our government own land. So that's nearly 30, if not 40% of their cost that they already have. Whereas a developer has to factor in that cost, and therefore they have to make a profit. We can look at housing cooperatives. Residents collectively own and manage properties, ensuring it's affordable and building community engagement. Now that's pretty cool. So if you look at an example in Sweden housing cooperatives, these are where members own shares in these cooperatives. This specific model in Sweden has been very, very successful. And the last option is non-profit organizations that own land. And I saw this in the US, a non-profit organization that owns the land and they lease it back to residents. This will ensure affordability because they don't have to make a profit, and it limits and prevents an increase or surge in rental prices. I saw a business in the US, I believe the Chapman Housing Trust, where they successfully implemented a scheme like this, and they're able to provide affordable housing while still maintaining some level of community control. One of them that really caught my mind was in Vienna. Vienna's social housing program is known across the world. About 60% of Vienna's population live in government-owned municipal housing. And the way this works is it requires massive long-term investment by the government. They also introduce high standards with regards to affordable rents. It's a requirement, so they made it happen. And they have this system where they have a mix of incomes amongst residents. This is to avoid segregation. So look, can we abolish landlordism? While it's theoretically possible, it would require a significant shift, maybe a structural and social shift in order for it to happen. Alternative housing models like public housing, cooperatives, community trusts, they all offer promising solutions, but it all swings back around to, do the government care enough to invest and put their money, aka our money, where their mouth is? Abolishing landlordism will introduce, I think, greater issues. Now, I'm for abolishing landlordism if it doesn't create more issues. Now, unfortunately, I think the idea of landlordism is already deep-rooted and far entrenched in society, and any changes has to be done from the government and at the legal level. And the reality is this: I think the social and economic benefit of landlordism, where we are right now, based on the system that we live in and based on the system that we operate in right now, unfortunately far outweighs the abolishment of landlordism. But we have to be careful, we have to hold the right people accountable, and we have to keep marching forward if we want to see any level of change. Hey guys, if you get some value from this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts. Should we abolish landlordism? Can we abolish landlordism? Or is it just a dream?